Evolution of Shadow Resolution with Kim Barta. Really excited to see this one myself as well. It's one of the reasons I chose to facilitate. I was just telling Kim and Terry about that. Obviously, I've done a lot of shadow work myself and I'm always learning more. And this is going to be a really, really interesting session. So a little bit about Kim first. He's an internationally recognized psychotherapist and speaker. He works with the entire spectrum of human development, from infants to elderly, and specializes in working with really advanced developmental levels of consciousness. He conducts his workshops internationally on human development and the evolution of consciousness, and with a real practical sort of focus on embedded, experiential, embodied exercises that can really make a difference in people's lives, bringing the mystical to the ordinary for everyday bliss. I love that phrase. I might steal that one, Kim. A little bit about this session we're about to step into. He says in the abstract, really every shadow practice has a healthy place and a purpose. And also every shadow practice has a shadow side. It's something I'd never thought about myself. So in this presentation, he's going to go through 3 broad categories of shadow, the evolution trajectory of resolving shadows, and how to apply any given shadow practice at the right time to really get it to do what you need it to do, where it won't cause any harm. So many people are excited about shadow work, and he really wants to sort of make it a lot more practical so you can become a better practitioner. And if you're a client as well of shadow work, you also know if the practitioner is leading you down the right road of the shadow, or whether it might be into the shadow side. So without further ado, I'm just going to hand you over to Kim. I'm going to be hanging out in the background. Anyone got any tech issues or any questions for Kim, I'm going to start collecting them. And I know we'll have different sessions throughout the hour and a half to answer those questions as well. But yeah, Kim, welcome.
Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you. Give me some hand waves here so I can see that we're all alive. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's so great to see you all. It's so exciting to be here with you today. Welcome to the IEC 2020. And this is the Evolution of Shadow Resolution. I am Kim Barta, and I'm going to work with evolution of shadow resolution with you today. I've been in practice for over 30 years, and I've worked with severe cases of trauma, multi-generational trauma, and I've worked with infants all the way to elderly, and I've worked with people at early developmental levels all the way to the latest stages of measured development. So I've had a real privilege of being able to experience and work with shadow in a wide variety of settings. And so I just want to really offer a little bit of hopefully a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of orientation for you all around shadow and how it can develop and how we evolve through it to resolution. And so I developed the evolution of shadow resolution. I'll begin by giving a short history of shadow and the concept of what shadow is about, and won't spend a lot of time on that. And then we'll go into the evolution of shadow resolution. We'll provide some education on each step, and then we'll have some experiential practices for many of the steps along the way. So of course, as you know, Freud developed, the unconscious was conceptualized even before Freud, but Freud made it fairly well known, and Jung was Freud's student, and he basically renamed the unconscious shadow. Now, some people say shadow and the unconscious are 2 different things, but even according to Jung, they're basically the same thing. And one of the things that often happens is people say, how can you work on shadow if shadow is by definition unconscious? And so what I illustrate in the evolution of shadow resolution is that there's degrees of awareness. There's degrees of shadow and degrees of awareness. So just because you become aware of a particular shadow issue doesn't mean you're aware of the complexity or the depth of the shadow issue. So what we're really working on is the illumination into the shadow. And as we illuminate more into the shadow gets illuminated and dissipates further and further. But just because you have the initial illumination doesn't mean the entire shadow disappears. So what we're going to talk about is how we illuminate at deeper and deeper levels as we go through the process. And each practice, each shadow practice that we have offers a different style and a different level of illumination. And what we need to do is honor all of the shadow practices that are out there, but realize is that if you've already got the illumination from one shadow practice, sometimes what you need to do is go to a different shadow practice to get to the next illumination. Otherwise, you just spin in the same place and don't get to the further, deeper resolution. So that's what we're going to describe for you today. First of all, I want to talk with you a little bit about what is not the shadow, because a lot of times when we have issues and we get into shadow and we love diving into the meat of it, and if we're shadow practitioners, we see shadow everywhere and we dive in. If there's a problem, then it's shadow-based. And so I want to get really clear that not every problem we have is shadow-based, and if we treat every issue as if it's a shadow issue, we can actually cause harm. So what we want to do is get our differential diagnosis down really clear so we don't project shadow into places where it doesn't exist. And the first thing that I want to talk about is biological issues. Biological issues can cause all kinds of disturbances psychologically, but that doesn't mean that they're shadow issues. For example, we can have frontal lobe disorders. We can have things like ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. None of these are shadow issues, and you can do shadow issues till you're blue in the face. I've worked with a lot of these cases. They are biochemical issues in the brain, and you can work with shadow issues till you're blue in the face. It's not going to resolve. You can have shadow issues around these issues, and you can resolve shadow issues around them, but if you actually project that these are shadow issues upon people that have these biochemical issues, we can actually cause harm because we add insult to injury. We imply that they are, that it's a psychological issue when it's a biochemical issue. And so it's really important that we understand that many of the psychological disturbances that we run across are not shadow issues. We can cause damage by projecting that onto our clients, and we can cause a lot of help by working with the shadow issues around it, but let's not imply that the issue itself is a shadow issue. ADHD, for example, a lot of anxiety around ADHD because the mind, that's a problem with the frontal lobe. So it's a frontal lobe disorder. It'd be like cutting off your arm and expecting somebody to write without any arms. You know, it's like, okay, you can write, but you're handicapped around. It's going to be hard. You might have to use your teeth or something, but it's going to be hard. So if you imply that this is all a psychological disorder, we cause harm to them. But the fact that the frontal lobe is damaged means that often there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of anxiety for multiple reasons. For example, if you're being raised and you have ADHD, it can drive the parents crazy because normal parenting techniques don't work. So they can lose their tempers, get upset with you, and then that can cause a lot of anxiety. And of course, that is creating some shadow issues. So we can work with the shadow issues around the ADHD, but keep in mind the ADHD itself is not a shadow issue. And what we want to do is provide support and mechanisms around it to support that and not project shadow issues upon it. So we have all the organic issues. We also have grief issues. Now, grief issues, at first glance, seem like that's pretty obvious. Somebody dies, you're in grief. We're not going to project shadow issues onto those people. But a lot of times, grief is not necessarily around death. Sometimes it's about a change of life and a loss of something in our lives. It doesn't have to do with death itself. And when I role play this type of grief issue around the world, the people that I do these workshops with, they almost always project shadow issue onto those kinds of grief issues. So we can have change of life grief issues. We can have grief issues that come when we transition out of not being a fundamentalist anymore, because that held us so nicely for so long, but now we're moving out of it and we're kind of grieving that. And sometimes it's easy for practitioners to project shadow issues onto these kinds of life transition issues, or other things that are a loss in our life that are not based around death. So we want to do a differential diagnosis around that before, and be careful not to project shadow issues onto that. Innocence is another category. Sometimes we just do not have experience with something and we get really disturbed around it. I mean, maybe we're in work and we're butting up against a personality that we've never, ever had to deal with in our life before. And so we're really disturbed by it. It's easy to project onto our client that, well, you've got shadow issues with this other person. But a lot of times they're just struggling with never having had any experience with this type of a person before. And what we really need to do is provide skills, not project shadow onto them for that. So we need to watch to see if this is a completely new experience for the person before we start diving into shadow work and say, okay, well, there's an emotional disturbance here. So we want to kind of separate that out before we dive into shadow work. And then the fourth category is developmental growth or existential issues. Often we're moving to new developmental levels. We're not even aware of it, but we're being very disturbed and being stirred up by different things because we're seeing new things that we've never seen before. Moving from 3.5 to 4.0, moving from 4.0 to 4.5, or for people moving from green, pluralist to strategist, to give a different name for it. So when we move to a new developmental level, sometimes that can be blissful, but sometimes it can be disturbing. And that does not necessarily mean that we have a shadow issue. And again, all of these issues, the organic issues, the grief issues, the innocence issues, the developmental issues, are not shadow issues, but to make things more complex, because of course things always are sometimes more complex than we like to see. All of these can be complicated by shadow issues. So what we can have complications of shadow issues around developmental issues. So we can help the developmental issues by working with shadow issues around those if they exist. But the developmental shift is not a shadow issue in and of itself. So being able to separate those out is really important so that we can really be clear and clean with our clients and clear and clean with ourselves if we're working on personal growth. That way, we're using the right tools for the right issue. And the right tool for the right issue for organic issues is to provide the structural support around them. For grief issues, to do grief work. For innocence is to help provide new tools to deal with the new experience. And for developmental issues, to provide developmental understandings and developmental tools and techniques to be able to land in your new developmental level in a skillful way. Shadow issues are not the right tool to use for that. So let's say we've got that cleared out of the way, and now we've got a shadow issue and we're going to work with shadow issues. Let's take a look at shadow issues and the evolution of shadow resolution. Now, shadow issues come in three forms. They always come in three forms, and we gotta address the right shadow technique to the right shadow, okay? The three forms are introjections, projections, and split ego states. Now, an interjection is when we absorb distorted information from the world, and then we hold it inside ourselves as if it's accurate and true to ourselves. This is called an introject. I've absorbed it from the outside, okay? A projection is just the opposite. I have distorted information and I'm projecting it out onto the world. It's about me, but I'm making it about you. Gosh, you're such an angry person. I can't believe you're so angry. Why are you so angry? I'm the one who's angry. I'm just putting it on you. And you're going, what are you talking about? I'm not feeling angry, right? So that's a projection, okay? And then we have split ego states. This is where we divide ourselves in two parts. And these two parts are fighting inside of our own consciousness. And so this is the division that occurs within us. So with introjects, I'm taking part of you and I'm going, oh, it's me. So I'm around somebody who's really anxious and all of a sudden I go, gosh, I'm really anxious. I feel all this anxiety in me. Well, what I've done is I've absorbed the anxiety from around me, pretended that it's me, and now I'm looking for all this disturbance inside of me. What I really need to do is release that anxiety back to where it came from. So this is where we use shadow techniques, release techniques. Release techniques are for introjects, okay? But imagine if you have a projection. If you use a release technique on a projection, I actually accentuate the projection. I make it bigger. Now, anger is almost always a projection issue, okay? I'm angry because I'm sorry, I'm having technical problems here with something. Okay, so projection is when we take something of ourselves and we put it on somebody else, okay? And often what we do is we project our power on somebody else and then we get angry. And so often what we do with anger is people start doing expressive techniques with anger. Well, now if we suppress our anger, we do need to do a little bit of expressive techniques with it, but the research is very clear. If you do a lot of expressive techniques with anger, the anger gets bigger. It doesn't resolve. We get a temporary release, a venting release, and we feel good, but it doesn't resolve it. It continues on and on and on and on and on. And that's because we're using a release technique designed for an introject on a projection. And it actually makes it worse, okay? People are starting to nod their heads, so they're making sense of this. Imagine now that you use a projection technique, which is re-owning. Projection techniques, we need re-owning tools, shadow tools, 3-2-1 process, for example. We need that for a projection technique. But if we use that on an introject, now what we're doing is we're entrenching the introject. Oh, there's anxiety. It's me. Oh, it really is me. I'm owning it as me. I'm really, really solidifying that introject inside of me. And I'm actually causing damage now. I'm damage to me and damage to my client because I'm using a projection technique, which is designed to re-own, on an introject, which we need to release. So you can see the damage we can cause when we use the wrong shadow technique with the wrong shadow issue. Now we have integration techniques for our split ego states. Our split ego states are torn apart. We need to integrate them back together, okay? You know, I have the bully and the victim inside of me. I need to take a look at those two. Now, sometimes those can be introjects or projections, not projections, but introjections. But a lot of times these are natural, normal, common, I shouldn't say natural, normal, but they're common split ego states inside of us. We have the one that wants the doer, and the beer, okay? And the doer and the beer gets split open, and then we go and we do, and the doer attacks the beer for just wanting to be in bliss and hang out. And it ends up being a victim-bully split, the bully and the victim, right? And so what we need to do is learn to integrate those into a harmonious oneness, okay? Now imagine that I use a release technique with one of these. Now what I'm doing is I'm actually taking a split ego state and I'm turning it into a projection. You're the bully out there. And now what I've done is I've disowned a part of me, projected it out onto somebody else, caused disturbance in the community, and I'm half the person that I am capable of being. So when we have a split ego state, we don't want to use a release technique with that, because all we do is we cause damage. We turn a split ego state into a projection by using an introject technique. Does that make sense? I know it's getting a little complex, but I'm using the introject technique, which actually turns a split ego state into a projection, and I actually create more shadow now. Okay? How many people are understanding what I'm saying here? You got this? Yay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, good. Good. Okay, so in summary, we have introjects, which is distorted information that I put inside of me from the outside world, and we need to release those. We have Projections, which are my disturbances, which I put on others, I need to re-own those. And I've split ego states. And the way that I heal those is I need to use integration techniques. So we have release techniques, integration techniques, and owning techniques. And there are a plethora of every one of those styles of techniques. But if you don't get the right shadow and the right technique lined up, we actually cause damage. Now, we as shadow practitioners often have our favorite shadow practice. Oh, it's just so delightful. I just love it. I'm so delighted by it. And I'm just going to, it works so good for me. I'm going to use it on everybody. And then what happens is I cause damage to 2/3 of my population, because a third of the time I'm going to hit it right. And I'm going to think, wow, I am an amazing practitioner. And 2/3 of the time I'm going to be causing damage. And I'm going to go, well, it just didn't take for them. I got to do it a little better. I got to try it harder. I got to do it more intensely. And now I'm just causing even more damage to myself and my clients. No, what we need to do is open our minds, have some flexibility and understanding of a differential diagnosis here. And when we do that, now we can heal all of our people instead of a third of them. Okay. So beautiful. So now once we get this differential diagnosis down, now we actually have the capacity to move into the evolution of shadow resolution. Okay. Because there's multiple steps to resolving a shadow, and every shadow technique we have might work with 1 or 2, but it probably doesn't work with all of them. Okay. And so this is where we need to take on and develop multiple skills for shadow work and align them up with the developmental spectrum, not the ego developmental spectrum, but the developmental spectrum of the evolution of shadow resolution. Okay. Whew. Okay. Quick question and answer here. For that, we'll just do a few of them. And then we'll go on to the evolution of shadow resolution.
All right, Kim, we've got quite a few in the chat box. I'm not sure if you want to scan back through and see if there's any you really want to pick out, or if you want me to grab a few.
Yeah, if you want to grab a few that make sense, Chris, that allows me to just stay focused on the...
Yeah. Okay, first from Jacqueline, I can see. What about the intersection of anger and giving power away? Could you speak a little bit more about the relation to introjection, projection, and the third one, which was that ego state split?
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful question. So when we're talking about anger, why are we angry? We're angry almost always, I'm not saying every time, but almost always because we don't have the power to handle a situation. There's multiple ways to handle situations. And we use skill after skill after skill after skill. And when all those skills fail, we often get angry, okay? And so what's happened is we've projected our power out onto the world, and then we're angry that we don't have the power to deal with whatever the issue is. So if we take our power back, we tend to not get so angry about situations. What we do is we just have a clear understanding of what my power is, what I can do, what my power isn't, and what I can't do. And I accept that. I accept that I don't have power here. I do have power here. This is a power I can use. And so I go for it. And so I'm very efficient and effective that way with my power. But if I project my power outward, I don't understand what I have power over and what I don't have power. And since my power is out there, I'm angry as hell at whoever has my power and how come they took that from me. And so then I get angry trying to get power that I already gave away. So if I just take my power back, I don't get angry about that because nobody has my power, okay? And now I'm just very clear on I have the power to address this or I don't, and I drop into acceptance or I drop into action, okay? Did that help with that? I got a lot of head nods on that. So.
Yeah, a lot of nodding. That was good.
Okay, beautiful.
And from what I can tell, a lot of people on this call are fairly versed in shadow work, but Florent in France is saying, you know, he's a little new to this. Could you give an example of a practice from each of those three? Probably a very brief example, I'm sure, but just to give a little
brief
context.
Example, if I have an interject, and let's say my dad always told me I was worthless, okay? a very quick example, and I'm not saying this would be highly effective because it's just a superficial example, but it'd be like, no, I'm not worthless, Dad. That's your opinion. I give your opinion back to you. And now what I'm going to do is discover who I am when I let you have your opinion. Who am I now without that? Okay. And it's actually very simple, but it can be very powerful. Sometimes that really does it, just simply doing that. A lot of times, though, we have to understand that shadow is encoded verbally, auditorially, visually, kinesthetically, olfactorily, sometimes in taste, sometimes in the way we even hold our balance in our bodies. So we have all our sensorial modalities, and shadow can be, if it's just hooked to the verbal, that technique will absolutely clear it up. Okay, it will clear it up. If it's hooked to verbal and visual, it'll clear up some of it, but not all of it. If it's hooked to verbal, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, balance, then it'll clear up a seventh of it, but it won't clear up any more of that. Okay, so we have to deal with all of our modalities that are affected by the shadow issue. And sometimes shadow issues only affect one modality. Sometimes they affect two or three. Sometimes they affect all of them. So as practitioners, we have to be aware of all the modalities that are being affected by the shadow, that are holding the shadow in place. So that would be an example of how I would do an interject with a release technique. How would I do a projection? Okay, this person pisses me off. I'm so angry at them. They are an awful person. You know, how am I giving my power away to them to affect my mood? What am I doing? Okay, and what I do is I take my power back, and so now I have my power inside of me, so I don't have to be angry at them anymore. And now I can just see them as a person. We're going to get into this a little more when we get into trigger aware in the evolution of shadow resolution. So I'm not going to go much more into that right now. With split ego states, I might have the doer and the beer, like I said before. I got to go do to be somebody important. I have to be to be okay, you know. So I have the bully and the victim, and so the bully's beating up on the victim for being a lazy, and the victim is going, "Why are you such a bully? Why do you have to, you know, attack me all the time?" And so what I do is I create a voice dialogue technique of some kind where the bully and the victim can talk to each other. And as they talk to each other, they start learning about each other better. The technique that I like best about this is before I allow the voice dialogue to begin, they have to identify the positive intent of each other. They identify the positive intent of themselves first. So the victim just says, my positive intent is to just enjoy life. And then the bully often says, my intent is to be successful in life so that we can enjoy life. And so now what I do is that I direct the voice dialogue towards the positive intent. Okay, bully, let's rename you action, success, and victim, let's rename you enjoying the moment. Okay, because if I have them dialogue as victim and bully, I'm going to entrench that shadow orientation. So I rename them their positive intents. Now when they dialogue, resolution starts flowing so much easier. Oh, you just want to enjoy life in the moment, and you want to be successful so we can enjoy life. We actually have a lot in common. Let's connect. See how beautiful that works when we do it that way? But if we really stay with the original names of the bully and victim, you can imagine what that dialogue is. Why are you always picking on me? Well, you're such a lazy shit. Well, fuck you for being so mean, you know? And so it gets really intense and violent for a while before it gets resolved. But we can bypass so much of that pain and suffering and infliction of suffering internally by getting to the positive intent right away and allowing them to rename themselves their own positive intent. And then the resolution occurs so much better. That's a little trick for you there. Okay, let's see. Shall we take one more question and then we will go to the evolution of shadow resolution?
Yeah, excellent. A couple of people were asking about EFT and where that might fit in.
Emotionally focused therapy, right?
Or emotional freedom technique.
Emotional freedom technique. Okay, so emotional freedom technique is a release technique, right? So what would you use it on? An introject. You use emotional freedom technique on an introject. If you use it on a split ego state or a projection, you're going to make things worse, okay? You're going to actually entrench the problem. You're going to create new problems, okay? So it's a beautiful technique. It's a beautiful release technique. One of many release techniques, and it's used for introjects, okay? And this is where we realize we do EFT. We go, oh, God, this is wonderful. I love it. It's worked for me so well. I'm going to use it on everybody, and I'm going to use it on all of my problems. And then, of course, we are successful a third of the time in a beautiful, beautiful way. And we cause damage the other 2/3 of the time. Okay, let's go to the evolution of shadow. Are you ready to go to the evolution of shadow resolution, folks? Are you ready? Are you ready? All right. Okay, I'm going to do a little screen share with you and give you a little bit of pretty here for a while. Okay. Let's see. I need to expand this so this is all there is. I don't know if I'm doing this right, but we're going to work on it. Okay. Okay, I think we got it. Okay, the evolution of shadow resolution has 5 steps. How does that look, everybody? Can you give me a thumbs up? Does that look okay? All right, thank you. Okay, the evolution of shadow resolution has 5 steps to it. The unaware, this is where we're in complete shadow. We're not even aware we have an issue. We don't even know that we're suffering. We just think we're cruising along good as can be. We are amazing. How many of you have felt amazing? Okay. And this is great, you know, we can be amazing. This is lovely. It's wonderful to be in the unaware stage. I'm not condemning it at all. We all need a break sometimes, and we need to be completely unaware of our shadow and just enjoy life for everything that we got. So that's okay. The problem is when we overuse it, then we just live in denial and we end up stacking up problem after problem after problem, and the whole thing comes crashing down on us and we are in misery, okay? So the unaware stage isn't something that I'm complaining about. It's just use it judiciously so we don't crash our life, okay? We all love to be a little bit in the unaware stage at times. Enjoy it, take a vacation, but let's be careful about overusing it, okay? So then we have, if we come out of the unaware stage, what we do is we enter symptom aware. We're aware that we have some suffering. And what we tend to do here is we do the logical thing, which is we attack the symptom. We think that we're solving the problem because we attack the symptom. So for example, we have a headache, so we take an aspirin. We have acid indigestion, we take an antacid. We have anxiety, we take an anti-anxiety pill. We have depression, we take an antidepressant. We are solving the problem because we are attacking the symptom and we're getting rid of the symptom. Wow, we've got this figured out, okay? Well, we're illuminated a little bit into shadow, but we're not very deep into the shadow. We're attacking it in one way, the logical solution when we're symptom aware, but we're not attacking the full depth of the shadow issue. Okay, the next step is trigger aware. Trigger aware is where we're aware of the external triggers. Okay, yeah, I'm suffering and I'm suffering, and every time I suffer, it's because of that trigger. That trigger is the problem. So what do we do to solve our problems here? We attack the trigger, or we eliminate it, or we run away from it. Whatever it takes to get away from that trigger, you know, I will kill it, I will destroy it, or I will run away from it, okay? So now I'm trigger aware, and the solution is to attack the trigger or run away from it. Okay, we're a little bit further illuminated. We're aware that we have suffering. We're aware that something is triggering that suffering in us, okay? And so we're a little more illuminated into our shadow. We're not completely there yet, but this is a very powerful place, you know, to stay away from people, places, and things that trigger us to the point that we cause suffering in our world. Okay, and that's really important, actually. Let me go back to symptom aware. Well, no, I'm going to go into these in a little more detail, so I'll just pop through them really fast, and then we'll go into them to a little more detail. I get so excited. I just want to go into detail right away. Okay, after trigger aware, it's like there are no triggers in the world. When we get to internal process aware, there's no triggers in the world. There are events in the world. I manufacture my triggers by the way I experience the world. And my job is to learn how I manufacture an event into a trigger, okay? And if I learn how I do that, I can reverse engineer that so I no longer have triggers in the world, okay? So that is internal process aware. Very powerful, and very deeply illuminated into the whole field of shadow by the time we get here, okay? But what we haven't done is conscious conceptualization. Now, to understand the difference between internal process aware and conscious conceptualization, I want you to imagine that shadow is like a tree. Now, I can do internal process aware, and I can get rid of a leaf off of that tree, another leaf, another leaf. I might even get down to a branch and cut off a branch, okay? But I haven't got to the core seed. I haven't got to the root of the shadow, okay? And so what happens when you cut off several branches of a tree? They sprout new ones. They sprout new shadows, okay? Now, I can be in internal process aware, and I could be clearing shadows. Anybody be in that place where you've got to have been clearing shadow and clearing shadow and clearing shadow and clearing shadow and clearing shadow, and I still have shadow. What's going on? Okay, what we're doing is we're trimming the tree. We're trimming and we're trimming and we're trimming, and we're so good at trimming, but the tree keeps sprouting new branches. What we have to do eventually is get to the root, pull up that whole tree so that it doesn't sprout any more branches. Okay, and that's what conscious conceptualization does. It deconstructs the original lie, the original seed, gets down to the root and tears up that whole shadow and creates a whole new growth for us, a new healthy growth. And then that new healthy growth becomes a positive growth in our life, okay? That does not mean we have eliminated all shadow. It means we have eliminated the shadow of that tree. We all have a forest, okay? So let's not pretend that because we've got to the core seed of one shadow, we've eliminated all shadow. What we've done is we've illuminated to the absolute depth of that particular shadow, pulled up the core seed, tilled the soil, created something healthy around it so that it grows something new and healthy, and it's become automated. So the shadow, that particular shadow, when we do that to that depth, that shadow disappears. It's gone and it does not come up anymore. Okay, now we can go dig up another shadow, okay? And we all have plenty of them. So, you know, don't get afraid that you're going to lose all your shadow. There's plenty more there. You don't have to feel lonely that it's gone forever. That one's gone. You got a whole forest to deal with. You got plenty of work to do, folks. Okay, so we will keep doing that. But once you learn how to take up the core seed, now you can do that more efficiently with the next one and the next one. And as we keep healing these more and more and more, the mind gets quieter and quieter. We get to a more peaceful place in our mind because we have fewer of these shadows shouting at us in our ear, okay? And we get to a natural, quiet mind. It's very beautiful. So this is the beauty that comes when we do this process on a very deep level. Okay, let's dive into this a little more detail. Okay, the unaware stage. I'm unaware of suffering. And the practical solution is, this is the practiced solution when we're in the unaware stage, is to remain in denial of our suffering. And we'll do whatever we can to remain in denial of it. We do drugs, we do alcohol, we do all kinds of addictions. And that helps us to remain in denial that we have any suffering. And if anybody confronts us on our drugs and our alcohol or whatever our addiction or avoidance mechanism is, we say, what's the matter with you? Leave me the fuck alone. You're the problem. I don't have any problems. You're the problem, okay? And of course, what we often tend to do here when we're helpful people is we try to hammer into this poor soul that how much problems they have. And what do they tend to do? They just put up bigger walls and say, fuck you, you're the problem, and I'm gonna stay away from you, okay? And so what we need to do actually to transition from unaware to symptom aware, to help other people transition from unaware to symptom aware, is we need to have an unconditional loving presence, okay? We need to have unconditional loving acceptance. And when we come from unconditional loving acceptance and we just talk with people and listen deeply to them, what happens is in this safe environment now, they're not being attacked anymore. In this safe environment, they start sharing different aspects of their life. And at some point, they'll become aware of something that's causing a disturbance for them. Okay? And when they do that, we can notice that disturbance. We can notice that suffering. And now we're in symptom aware. Okay? But we have to be very gentle here, because keep in mind, we're not saying I'm listening to your problems, because they don't have problems at this place. Okay? They don't have problems. They don't have issues. Okay? They just have experiences. And what we're doing is we're listening to their life experiences, and we are the ones that see the illumination of the shadow. Okay? And we see the suffering, and we just hold that suffering very tenderly, and that allows them to see the suffering very tenderly. Okay? And now they're in symptom aware. The research shows if you go from just unaware to symptom aware, you have a 50% chance of moving them to the next developmental level. Okay? So you've just increased their odds of resolving their shadow by 50%. And the way you do that is not by attacking, that entrenches it deeper. You do it by being an unconditional loving presence, absolute acceptance without judging that this is an issue or this is a problem. Okay? We're just listening deeply to them. And that helps move them from unaware to symptom aware. Okay, so it's a very tender process. It's the opposite of what people tend to do. Okay. Now that we're in symptom aware, we're aware of the symptoms of suffering. And as I said before, the practiced solution from this level of consciousness, and keep in mind, we all do this. Okay? None of us are above being in unaware and keeping ourselves in unaware by using avoidance mechanisms. Okay? They're not always just simple drugs, alcohol, the very easy things. Eating, right? We can often eat junk food, we can eat different things, but we can also just we can use even our spiritual practices to remain in the unaware stage. Remember, mindfulness meditation, have a thought, let it go, have a thought, let it go, have a thought, let it go. What happens when we have a disturbing thought? We let it go. I don't want to look at that one. That's not comfortable. Get rid of that one. Oh man, I want to go to emptiness as fast as possible. Okay? So we're actually using mindfulness meditation as a denial technique when we do that, okay? Now, don't get me wrong. Don't go quoting Kim is against mindfulness meditation. That's not what I'm saying. If you're doing a spiritual practice and you're trying to get to emptiness, mindfulness meditation is a wonderful way to do it. But it's not going to help you resolve shadow issues, okay? So again, use the technique for what it's for. It can get you to a spiritual state. It's not, but it can be misused to help you avoid shadow, okay? Every technique has a blessing. Every technique has a shadow side. And if you misuse it, you get the shadow side of it, okay? And that's just, I don't write the rules, folks. I'm just telling you about them, okay? Okay, so we go from unaware to symptom aware, and the practical solution here that we use here is we attack the symptoms. And like I said, you got a headache, you take an aspirin. You have indigestion, you take an anti. Okay, but I might also have anxiety. And what do I do with my anxiety? I might attack the symptom of anxiety by taking an anti-anxiety pill, but I might just go exercise really hard, you know, and just exhaust myself really bad, you know. So I'm going to attack the symptom. I'm going to try to attack it in any way that I can. But I'm not trying to understand myself on a deeper level. How do we move from symptom aware to trigger aware? It's actually a very simple move. Instead of attacking the symptom, we feel the symptom a little deeper. Again, we use the unconditional loving acceptance for that, but we feel the symptom a little deeper, and now we add time to the symptom. We go, what happens just before I feel the anxiety? What happens just before the depression accentuates? What is the external trigger that occurs that gets me to this worked up place? Is it a politician? Is it my in-laws? Is it my spouse? What is it? What is it that gets me worked up? Okay. Now I'm in trigger aware. And so what we'll do is we'll go to trigger aware. And again, we're in trigger aware. We're aware of the external trigger that precedes the suffering. And the tendency is to stay away from the triggers or attack the triggers. These are very important things, because if the triggers are very disturbing for us, we sometimes can't get a purchase to get clear to the next developmental level. So for example, if we get triggered into severe alcoholism or drug use or things like that, we stay away from people, places, and things that lead us to that. And that's going to give us a little bit of room to move to the next developmental level. So I'm not saying don't stay away from your triggers. You know, if the triggers are overwhelming, we want to stay away from them so that we can get clarity. But then we want to be able to reflect on it. We don't want to just stay there. We want to be able to reflect on them. So again, we have the unconditional loving witness. We have the, I recommend the healing for good process. You can look that up. I just forgot the author's name. I'm sorry about that. I should have written it down. I usually remember it. But healing for good is a good process for people that are at trigger aware. And it walks you through a multi-step process from the beginning to the end to work through this level on a lateral level, so that you actually resolve things on the trigger aware stage very well. But it doesn't move you to a deeper place. It doesn't illuminate shadow on a deeper level. It heals it on a breadth level from this way, but it doesn't heal it as we go deeper. What we need to do from that is we extend inward with time, and we use insight-oriented techniques, more insight-oriented techniques, which we go from noticing the internal process that correlates with the trigger. So what we do is we go, okay, I got a trigger, and now instead of blaming the trigger, saying, oh, you're a trigger, oh, that's a trigger, oh, you're a trigger, you trigger me, I need to get rid of you, right? What we do is we move to, okay, I need to move to internal process that manufactures the trigger in the first place. So I move to internal process aware. Now, a lot of times this is where people say that they're starting to do shadow work, but we have to be aware that when somebody comes in or when we're working with ourselves, that all of these are shadow processes to move to more illumination. But a lot of us get excited when we get to internal process aware. The problem is a lot of times, if we go back to symptom aware, we get symptom aware mixed up with internal process aware. And the reason for that is when we go into symptom aware, we go internal, okay? And when we're internal and we go deeper into the symptoms and into the suffering of the symptoms and into the suffering of the suffering of the symptoms and into the deep, deep depths of the suffering of the symptoms, we think that we're in internal process aware. No, we're just moving deeper into symptom aware, okay? We're still not aware of the triggers, and we're not aware of how we're manufacturing the triggers. So it's important to understand the difference between deep symptom aware and actual internal process aware. With internal process aware, we can feel the depth of the internal suffering, but we also are aware of the triggers that are causing it, and we are aware of how we are manufacturing the suffering by the way we think about it, the way we feel about it, by the way we respond to it, by the way we hold our bodies with it. Okay, so what we do is we tend to, in internal process aware, dive deep into the inner world, and we improve our internal coping skills. We improve self-soothing skills. We get good at relaxation techniques. We get good at reality checks, so we change the way we think about things. We get good at affirmations, so we get good at feeling better about how we work. We work with initial reconstruction, so we can deconstruct a thought and reconstruct it in a new way, deconstruct an emotional pattern and reconstruct it in a new way that helps us to release the shadow. So these are more sophisticated techniques than just deep, deep insight, which can happen at symptom aware. And many times as practitioners and as people working on our shadow, we can get lost in deep insight at symptom aware and never progress to internal process aware. Okay? So I want you to really, are people getting the difference between those? Or how many people got that? Any confusion? I'm not getting as many head nods as I was getting before. Okay? I don't know what happened to my Prezi here. Something just happened. Oh, I went back to the beginning of a very long Prezi. Okay, so for internal process aware, we can get very deep. And actually, this helps. Let me go back to, this is part of a much longer presentation. So when we look at working with shadow, we have depth, breadth, and height. And I can use depth at every developmental level along the evolution of shadow resolution. For example, I can be very deep in the unaware denial stage, but I can be very deep in the symptom aware stage. And a lot of times we feel like we're doing really deep shadow work when we're moving into the depth of that symptom aware stage. We're really aware of the pain of the symptoms. We're locating it in the body. We're just going deep into the symptoms, okay? And that's very good work, okay? But it's not internal process aware. It's just deep insight, okay? And deep insight is very powerful, and sometimes it's enough to resolve the issue, but it's not necessarily enough, okay? So I'm gonna go through this. This isn't part of this particular, this is part of a larger one that I do in my courses, okay? It outlines a much larger field of shadow work. Okay, conscious internal process aware gets us into how we're actually manufacturing the triggers, how we're manufacturing the shadow in the first place. And it actually eliminates the leaves, it eliminates whole branches of shadow and clears up the mind. It's very beautiful and very deep work. But the difference between internal process aware and conscious conceptualization is we're not just resolving the shadow issues that are in front of us, we're getting to the core seed of how it was originally formed in the first place. And that moves us to conscious conceptualization. And what we do is we get to the original issue. We have 7 steps in conscious conceptualization. We've already gotten out of the unaware. We're aware of our symptoms. We've had a deep exploration of our symptoms. We've discovered the triggers that lead to those symptoms. We've discovered the way our mind works to manufacture those triggers out of the events of the world, because there are no real triggers in the world. There's just simply events, which our mind turns into triggers. That's what happens with internal process aware. There's no more triggers in the world. We understand how we're manufacturing triggers out of events. Then at conscious conceptualization, we're diving into the core seed, how our mind got to the point of manufacturing triggers out of events of the world. We're going, how did our mind ever get there in the first place? How did this evolution of mind go to the point of taking a simple event in the world and turning it into trauma for me? Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm spiraling down to the core seed. Where did that originally, what was the original lie that ever caused my mind to manufacture triggers? Okay, and then when I get to that core seed, I deconstruct that core seed. I deconstruct the lie, the core lie, and now this is where we often make the biggest mistake. This is often where we make the biggest mistake in our own world and as practitioners, is we start trying to reconstruct something, but we do it from our dominant ego. Our ego says, oh, I deconstructed this, now I'm going to construct something new that's better. And it will construct something new that's better, but it will do it from the dominant ego, which is traumatized from the original issue in the first place. So all it can do is reconstruct another trauma. And we as practitioners go in and we could reconstruct. We do it from our dominant ego state. We as people do it from our dominant ego state. This is a core issue that happens that reconstructs another disturbed shadow tree, and we grow a whole new shadow tree. It's probably better than the original one, not quite as distorted, but it's still distorted. So what we need to do, and this is a really crucial piece, what we do is when we deconstruct the core seed, we need to go into unconditional loving witness with no intent, with no plan, with no agenda. We need to enter the empty space where the core seed, the core issue got released, and we need to allow that pure space to allow a reconstruction to emerge from there. And it will, if we do this correct, it will reconstruct a healthy ecosystem, a healthy conscious ecosystem. If we do it from the dominant ego state, we're going to pollute that new pure space that we just spent all of this work on through the evolution of shadow resolution to root up the core seed and create this pure space from which a healthy ecosystem can emerge. And then we go in and pollute it with our dominant ego. No, we got to keep our dominant ego out, and we got to sit in the silence and the emptiness of this space and allow it to redevelop, reconstruct a new healthy ecosystem. Once we do that, if we do that correct, if we do that in the right way, if we keep that dominant ego out of the way, then what'll happen is a reconstruction will emerge from this space. It's very healthy and very beautiful. And then what we need to do is create an embedded practice. What happens at this point, often what we do, even if we get to the point of deconstructing the core seed and having the dominant ego recreate something, what we do is we often say, I did it, and it's over. No, it's not over at this point, because what happens is we have homeostasis. And homeostasis is the tendency for a system to reconstruct itself, to stay in its original balance. And so what'll happen is I got the insight, I dug up the core seed, and then I go on with my life, and our life reconstructs the original shadow all over again. And now 3 weeks down the road, we're right back to where we were. And we're going, God, I thought I did my shadow work. Why is this happening? Well, it's because homeostasis took over and we reconstructed the same shadow that we just got through getting rid of. And then we go back and get rid of it again, and then we reconstruct it. Then we get rid of it again. We go, gosh, I thought I was doing my shadow work. Why isn't this working? Well, it's because we didn't create an embedded practice. What we need to do is nurture the new healthy ecosystem. And so what we need to do is take time to convert our new meditation practice to the new ecosystem. So in the morning, we just drop into the new healthy ecosystem, not the dominant ego state that's controlling it, but let go of the dominant ego for a little bit. Just drop into the new healthy ecosystem and just let it evolve, let it grow, let it be healthy. We want to do it a couple times, morning and evening, perhaps, do a deep dive and really let it get nurtured and grow and be beautiful. And then what we want to do is throughout the day, maybe every hour, remember it. Because then that uproots, like when you ever notice, like if you cut off a tree at the trunk or we root it up, that little suckers will sprout up. Ever see those trees with suckers sprouting up all over the place? Well, that's what's going to happen is these suckers are going to sprout up. And doing a frequency practice, like every hour, it's like tilling the soil of your garden. It's uprooting the seeds, the weeds that grow up. You get the weeds that grow up, and by doing the frequency practice, those weeds can't get a root in the new ecosystem, the new healthy ecosystem. And so what grows is the healthy new plant, the healthy new ecosystem, the healthy new garden. And without the embedded practice, the weeds grow up, the suckers grow up, and the healthy new wisdom just gets choked out, okay? So what we need to do is create an embedded practice that creates a new homeostasis. And we know that if we do this really well, it only takes about 6 weeks. The neuroplasticity of our mind is there. We know how it works. If we do this well, in 6 weeks, we will have a new homeostasis that will start automating on its own without us having to even practice it. That doesn't mean we quit our practice at this point. We keep our practice beyond the 6 weeks. But if we do this really well, within 6 weeks, there will be a new integrated, automated new world view. We will start seeing the world through the new healthy ecosystem rather than through the old homeostasis. This is work, but this is what we do. This is why so often, we as shadow practitioners, we do the shadow work, the person feels better, they go off on their own, we slap ourselves on the back, we say, great work done, and then 6 weeks later, they're back to their old issues, and then they come back in, and it's really good because it keeps our practice full, but it's not particularly good for our clients, okay? So we need to look at that. So this new automated worldview occurs now, and what we do is we keep practicing and practicing it. And then number 7, the elimination of trigger check. What we do is we go and we embed ourselves back in those old things that used to be triggers for us, okay? And we notice, do we have a response? Am I triggered by it anymore? Okay, and this is the beauty of having a really robust trigger. What we do in Trigger Aware is we want to list out all its triggers and all of our responses to the triggers, because now if we do Trigger Aware in a full, robust way, when we go back to check, we will know if the automated worldview is stronger than the triggers, right? Okay, because what will happen is we won't see triggers anymore. We'll just see events in the world. We won't push away. We won't get disturbed by them. We won't cling to them. We won't do any of that. We'll just go, oh, it's another event in the world. We'll just have we'll be seeing the world in a new way. And that lets us know that we've actually done our work skillfully and that it's automated. We don't have to work at releasing the trigger. It just isn't there anymore. So this is the evolution of shadow resolution: unaware, symptom aware, trigger aware, internal process aware, and conscious conceptualization. And if we shortchange ourselves on any of these steps, then we don't always get to the full depth of the shadow healing. Sometimes we can go through them very fast. I've seen people, I've worked with people, and we've gone through all of them in one session and done a great job. And of course, then you have the embedded practice that you need to work on for weeks and sometimes months after that. But you can actually go through this whole process in one session. And sometimes the most you can do is sit in the unaware for several weeks until, several sessions until they finally become symptom aware. And so there's no judgment about how fast you go through it. What you want to do is make sure that you do it skillfully with each step for what each step is. Now, remember where I said you have interjects, projections, and split ego states, okay? Each one of these will go through these 5 steps, but you will have to use different shadow practices with each one of these 5 steps in a sense, right? Especially when you get the internal process aware and conscious conceptualization, because you need to deconstruct them in different ways. You need to deconstruct an introject in exactly the opposite way that you deconstruct a projection. And both of those are different ways than you deconstruct a split ego state, okay? Now, a lot of times our people come into us and they're already in internal process aware, but we need to be clear that they're not in symptom aware, just going deep, right? Okay, but if they're actually in internal process aware, now we can start working with deconstructing, whether it's an introject, a split ego state, or a projection, okay? That's where that deconstruction process starts occurring. And we can help them with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this, but we're going to see that each one of those styles of shadow are going to have different presentations, even in the unaware stage, even in the symptom aware, in the trigger aware, and definitely when we start going into an internal process aware, that's where we're really going to dive into those different tracks for how we resolve them. And then conscious conceptualization even deeper, okay? And that's going to get you through the evolution of shadow resolution in a very beautiful way and a very efficient, effective, and long-term effective manner for resolving your shadow issues, okay? I'm going to stop my share now. We're going to come back to each other, and I don't even know how much time we have left. How much time do we have left?
We have got 25 minutes.
25 minutes. Okay. Folks, do you want to do a short question and answer here and then go into some practices, or do you just want to go into some experiential practices? What do you want?
Because of the time, I think maybe experiential and into some breakout groups first, and then the Q&A.
Okay, let's do some breakout groups and we'll do some Q&A. All right. So let's play with, let's do some breakout groups and go. I'm assuming any of you have symptoms that you're aware of. How many people are aware of having symptoms of some kind? Okay, good. I would hope that we're consciously aware enough to be aware that we have some symptoms. So we'll skip the aware to the symptom aware. We'll go right from symptom aware to trigger aware. And what we want to do is create a list of triggers and a list of the responses that we have to the triggers, okay? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go into breakout groups. We're going to split into about groups of 3 or 4. And what we want to do is just share the symptom, and then what we want to do is help each other identify the triggers. And what we do is we stay focused on people, places, events. What are the people, places, and events that these triggers, that these symptoms seem to be accentuated, okay? And let's and document your triggers and document your how they lead to your responses, okay? We'll just do this one for about, let's do it for 10 minutes, okay? 5 minutes, a few minutes for each person, okay?
A couple of questions. One is the split ego. What is the technique that you would suggest first before any others for split ego work once you're at the, the proper level for being ready for it? Right.
Well, I mean, there's all these techniques. They all basically come out of Gestalt therapy. All of these voice dialogue techniques are just a footnote to Gestalt therapy.
Okay.
Really. So if you want to get the basics of all of them, go read Gestalt therapy. And they've created an unbelievably sophisticated dynamic. The problem with almost all voice dialogue techniques is they don't recognize interjects and projections. Everything's a split ego state. And so they try to integrate everything. And so you're integrating projections, you're integrating interjections, and that becomes a problem.
I see. Okay,
but
great.
In terms of the actual, all of them, big heart, big mind, voice dialogue, they're all footnotes to Gestalt therapy.
Yeah, okay. And then the other one is when the practice of sitting with, I was curious if you wanted to elaborate or could elaborate a little bit of, once it's arisen, which is something that I've naturally, I'm not a shadow work facilitator, but it's something I've been naturally saying, for a very long time, which is as soon as I'm aware of something, I just want to sit with it. I don't want to try to cure it because I know I'm going to screw it up, right? I just want to sit with it and allow the consciousness to do what it does. Do you have a particular practice or suggestion for the way to sit with, or when you're ready to move beyond sitting with?
So one of the important things is what ego state are you using to sit with something? Okay. So for example, if the ego state that I have activated is the judgmental ego state, I'm going to have a whole different experience with sitting with something than if I have the unconditional loving witness, right?
Yes.
So the main thing is to get your overall consciousness into the unconditional loving witness. Okay. Because then it will unfold in the most beautiful, natural way. Okay. And there's not necessarily a time to stop sitting with. That process works all the way through, but there's times to add in dynamics. Okay. When we're with the unconditional loving witness, the thing is the witness can be focused in, which can help us drop into more depth, right? But as we move into depth, we can lose perspective, wisdom. We have deep intimacy with whatever it is, but we've lost wisdom, which is perspective, okay? And so what we want to do is the unconditional loving witness can zoom out and get really good perspective, but maybe then it loses some intimacy, okay? So what we want to be able to do is do both of those. Zoom in and get the intimacy, the nuances of it, and we want to zoom out and get the perspective on it so that we understand. You know, if you're zoomed in, it's hard to hold, is this an interject, a split ego state, or a projection, right? I'm just in the intimacy of the suffering of it. But by zooming out, you can go, oh, wait a minute, I can see what this is, and I understand the process now of what needs to happen, okay?
Okay.
So when we're in the unconditional loving witness, we want it to be able to zoom in and get the intimacy and zoom out and get the perspective, okay?
Got it. So the loving unconditional witness is, it's on one side, the other side is this, you know, the judgmental or whatever. Is there, in my experience, I tend to go to a very neutral place. There's nobody there.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like a pure creative space, and then whatever arises out of it. So I'm not trying to hold loving witness. I'm not in any judgment. I'm just truly in a stillness of it.
Yeah.
Is that
How do you know you're in stillness?
Only because when I come out of it, it felt very still. You know, I mean, I spend a lot of time in stillness in general. So that was that's just sort of been the posture that I've taken, but not necessarily the best one. It's just what I've done.
So you're not consciously aware of the stillness while you're in it?
Only as much as I'm aware of the birds singing or whatever. But yeah, there's not as much mental activity happening then.
Right, but there's no witness, like you're in absolute, you're unconscious when you're in
stillness. If I zoom in or zoom out, there's a witness if I zoom in, and if I zoom out, you know, there's just kind of in the all that is state, if you will.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So apparently you're conscious of it. I
am aware of it. Correct.
Thank you.
I can be aware of it.
Yeah.
Whether I am or not all the time, I don't know, but I know I can be.
So just a quick survey. How many people were able to identify a list of triggers? 5 of you. No, I'm teasing. Okay, thank you for participating. Okay, how many of you were able to identify how your mind manufactures a trigger out of an event? All right, good. Some of you were. All right, good. Some of you weren't. That's fine. Okay, that goes to show how complex that shift is, really. Quite a few people could identify triggers. It was a lot harder to go, how does my mind manufacture trigger out of an event? And so that's a complex piece of work right there. And so you can see how that needs to be tenderly held and supported as we go, because that's kind of a vulnerable thing to go, wait a minute, I'm manufacturing the trigger in my own mind. These are just events. That's a little bit humbling and embarrassing in some ways, because it's like I've spent my life around this trigger, you know, external oriented, and now it's all in me, right? So it's a kind of a humbling thing, especially when we're dealing with something that really, really disturbs us. We tend to want to make it out there, not as a result of the way that I'm manufacturing my mind. So that's a very humbling experience, but it's also what shines that illuminated light. But it can be a complex step to be able to do that. All right, questions and answers. Any thoughts, questions, and answers that you have?
We talked a little bit about the interplay between interjection and projection.
Yes.
Because it came up of the idea, if I'm taking on like an idea of someone else or an opinion of someone else, am I not also at the same time giving away my power to someone else? So if you could—
Beautiful. Beautiful observation. Absolutely. As soon as we take on an interject, we tend to be giving up power. And this is really big in, like, especially trauma too, like people that have been sexually abused, raped. What happens is they take on the dirtiness of a lot of people that have been raped or sexually abused or especially molested as infants, they feel dirty inside. Well, they're not dirty inside, right? What they've taken on is they've interjected the dirtiness of the perpetrator. And they feel like victims. They've given up their power. So their power goes out to the perpetrator, and the perpetrator goes into them. So there's this exchange of energy, right? And so what we want to do, if we were to just stick with integration techniques, we would actually integrate, oh, what's that dirtiness in you? What's going on with you that you're feeling dirty? What's that dirtiness? Let's get that integrated. Well, no, now you're really integrating the perpetrator into the innocent person, right? No, we need to use a release technique with the dirtiness, but then we need to use a projection and owning technique with the power. And this is often where a trauma work goes wrong, is we get rid of the one, maybe the practitioner doesn't do the integration, they actually get the part where it needs to be released, but we never have them re-own the power, okay? So what we need to do is do that complete exchange, okay? And so that was really insightful that you and your group had, that anytime there's an interject, there's generally some release of power out into the world.
I would like to pick up the question of Sophia. She posted it into the chat. Would you prefer to share this whole step-by-step process with people in therapy or in a conversation where you help them? Will that help them if they're aware of this process, or do you just go through it and not tell them anything about what you're doing?
I rarely feel a need to tell them, but sometimes people say, I need to understand what we're doing here. And then I'll share it with those people. A lot of people don't. They just say, hey, fix me, you know, excuse me. They just say, fix me, do it, you know, and they trust you and it's beautiful, you know, and so that's great. So they don't need that. But other people are going, wait a minute, what are you doing? What's happened? What's the next step? What's the step that you just did? I want to understand what's going on, okay? For those people, I want to give them that comfort of, yes, there is something going on here. There is a master plan. It does work. Here's how it operates, okay? So it just depends upon the client whether I do that or not. Some clients, you know, if you start sharing that with them, that's like they just space out. It's like, I'm not interested in this. Why are you wasting my time?
I was just wondering about the practice, the embedded practice. Could you give us an example, and would it be any different for the 3 types of the shadow or different techniques? What might it look like?
Yeah, so the actual practice might not be different for the techniques. It's what's reconstructed that's different, how it's deconstructed and reconstructed. But the actual practice, the general practice that I offer people, just based upon neurobiology, is I want to do a deep dive at least twice a day. And I generally do that when I ask them to do it when they go to sleep. When you go to sleep, just drop into this new place because it's a blissful place. If you do this right, the new ecosystem is blissful for them. This isn't work. And so when you ask them to do it at night, they're like, oh, that sounds like a great thing to do. You know, that's the, you know, if you got this right, they're going, oh yeah, if I go to sleep on that, that just feels great. You know, and so it's not really work. It's like a delightful experience for them, and you're giving them a delightful experience for homework, right? So it's just a meditative practice. It's blissful for them. And then in the morning, it's like, what if you wake up on this? How does that feel? And they go, oh God, that'd be great to wake up on this. This is so much better, you know? And then the frequency practice depends upon how intense the trigger is for them, how intense the old, not even the trigger, but the old, homeostasis is. If the homeostasis comes up only once or twice a day, the frequency practice can be 3 or 4 times a day, right? If the old homeostasis comes up every hour, then you need to have the frequency practice be every hour. If it comes up every 15 minutes, you need to increase it to every 15 minutes. So it depends upon how intense and how frequent the old homeostasis is to measure that. Because if it comes up every 15 minutes and you're having them do it twice a day, those weeds are just going to get good roots, you know, and you're not going to really get them uprooted. So you need to keep it tilled to the degree that the frequency of the old homeostasis arises. I did want to clear up something. There's somebody that said in the chat that, so you don't think biochemical issues are related to our mental states. I did not say that. They absolutely are related to our mental states, okay? I am not saying that. Can we govern our biology? Yes, we can use psychology to govern biology. I'm not saying that either. I've done work with people where, I've done psychological work where I had this one nurse, for example, who came in. We did some deep shadow work. She went home and she passed a bloody stool into the toilet. She looked at it. It was a tumor, and she passed a tumor after doing some really deep shadow work, okay? So yes, shadow work can have a huge impact upon biology, but that doesn't mean that, you know, that all biology responds to all shadow work, okay? If a biology issue arose out of shadow, because shadow can create biological issues, if it arose out of shadow, then you can cure that biology through shadow work. However, not all biology came out of shadow. And we do really disservice by saying, oh, you have cancer, just do your shadow work, do some deep conscious spiritual work and you'll heal your cancer, you know, and we end up shaming people who have true biological issues. And it doesn't matter how spiritual you are or how much shadow work you do, you're going to die from your cancer. And so we end up traumatizing and hurting people because they have biological issues. And we just need to not do that. That does not mean that psychology can't affect biology, but it can't always. And we need to have some humbleness around that. And I've been humbled myself over these 30 years, thinking, oh man, I'm so fucking good, I can heal anything. And just being humbled by very real life circumstances. And so I just want to offer that to you, not to be as arrogant as me. You know, if I can offer any, you know, I mean, this happens. Sometimes we err on the side of disempowerment. Sometimes we err on the side of over-empowerment, you know, and it's finding that balance of being fully empowered without being arrogant or disempowered. And that's the balance that we as practitioners, I think, need to find. And I think in the world in general. I'm actually, the timing is amazing because I'm actually just finished the evolution of shadow resolution in my personal course, and we're just starting Shadowcraft in about a few weeks. And so if you actually want to go into this in a little deeper level, understand a bigger field of the shadow work craft, and dive into how to do this a little bit more, you're welcome to do that. And we're offering a discount for everybody at the IEC. And if you don't mind, I'll share my screen one more time.
I've just shared the link in the chat for everyone.
Okay. And this is just another aspect of that. 25% discount for all of our fall 4-week programs. I think that's going to be extended to the Shadowcraft course. Stagesinternational.com. If you go to stagesinternational.com IEC 2020, you'll get that discount. And also when you sign up at Stages International, get a free PDF of the Stages Roadmap. Okay, and the Stages Roadmap will add in not only it doesn't have the evolution of shadow resolution, but it has development in it. And so you have to understand the development also has an impact upon the types of shadow and the evolution of shadow resolution. So it's a much more complex picture even than what I've shown, but this is one beautiful process that's there. Anyway, love to share that with you if you want to join us. Anyway, lots of love to everybody. Thank you so much for attending. Lots of love. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful people. Thank you.
Thank you.